start doing some of the intro talking here and welcome everybody to Big Tent. So glad to see you all this morning, afternoon, wherever you are. We are Big Tent USA. We are a group of women who came together about a year and a half ago. And our major goal is civility in governance, good governance, honesty. We try to lean to the center and be inclusive in our Big Tent. And we were all women, now we have some men as well. We are open to people who are thinking, caring, concerned citizens. So this is wonderful today, having iCivics with us. So we're delighted about that. I can tell you about a couple upcoming events that we have. One is next week, Tent Talks, this hour. Next week will be Will Carter from the Rural Democracy Initiative. And he will be talking about rural politics and activism in West Virginia, which is very interesting. And has, he talks about Manchin and his critical role, and that we should all be laying off because we need him to continue to win. So that's an interesting talk next week. Wednesday, the 26th, we have our spotlight speaker, which is our evening speeches that we have by prominent people. This time we have Senator Amy Klobuchar coming to speak, along with the former Deputy Secretary of State, Tom Nidus. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Anyway, that's in a couple weeks. We'll have our spotlight speaker, Amy Klobuchar. And we will continue with our activism and our letter writing. So everyone here, I hope that if you are not writing letters, that you will put it in the chat and we can send you some. We generally send out batches of 20 at a time. So if you could request 20 or 40 and write letters to New Mexico for Deb Haaland's seat, which was vacated by her when she became Secretary of the Interior. And so continue with that good work. Come to our future events. Support Big Tent USA by coming and learning and being together and thinking about what's important in our country and helping us to shape a future our children will be proud of. So I'm turning it over to Kitty.
Great, thanks, Karen. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Big Tent, to our Tent Talk with iCivics. I want to let you know that this Tent Talk has been in the making for quite some time. Jay O'Connor and I were introduced by a mutual friend in December. And after we had a Zoom conversation all about his mom, Sandra Day O'Connor, and civics education, we just knew that iCivics and Big Tent had to meet. It also turns out that one of our Big Tent community members, Lindsay Reimers, is on the board of iCivics. So it made it even more imperative that we have this conversation today. So we are so thrilled to have iCivics come to Big Tent. Jay O'Connor is a senior software industry executive and is one of the three sons of Sandra Day O'Connor. He is a managing partner at Silvertree Associates, advisory partner at Morgan Stanley Expansion Capital, and a member of the governing board of iCivics, which was founded by his mom. iCivics champions equitable, nonpartisan civics education for students. And I should say it is completely free to both students and educators. Louise Dubé has been the executive director of iCivics since 2015. Previously, Louise had a successful career in educational publishing and instructional technology for over 20 years. Louise won the 2017 People's Choice Award from the DVF Diller Foundation, as well as a 2018 Civics, which is the American Civic Collaboration National Award. So that is super impressive, and I'm going to guess she got to go in person in a nice dress. She was also recognized as a 2019 Donaldson Fellow by the Yale School of Management. Louise began her career as an attorney in Montreal, Canada, and holds a law degree from McGill University, as well as an MBA from Yale University. So she is super impressive too. Please remember to put your questions in the chat for Louise and Jay, and I'm going to let them take it from here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kitty. And Louise and I are really happy to be able to join you all today. So as Kitty mentioned, I'm Justice O'Connor's youngest son. And when people think of my mom, they most often think of her as the first woman appointed to the Supreme Court. And certainly that was a role that made her iconic for many women in the country. But few people know about her deep commitment to civic education. And she actually has said many times that she thinks that her most lasting legacy and her most important legacy is actually iCivics, which she founded about 11 years ago. When she retired from the court, she recognized that something was wrong in the country and that not enough Americans understood the basics of how our government is designed to work and how citizens can participate in democracy effectively and affect change. And that this lack of knowledge was actually fueling both division and disengagement among the citizenry. So she founded iCivics in about 11 years ago. In her, I think she was 79, if you believe it, when she started this nonprofit educational organization. And the goal was to focus on young people as the way to really improve knowledge about sort of these basic principles of how our country is designed to work. So she traveled the country, she pulled together some initial funding, she put together a great team. She was always adamant that civic education had to be a nonpartisan issue, a nonpartisan approach. And that is core to iCivics' mission today, where we seek to find common ground across the political spectrum for this important cause. And Louise will talk about it, but I can fast forward just as one highlight. From 11 years ago, now half the kids in the country use iCivics to learn about civic education. So not bad for a startup by a 79-year-old woman at the time. So with that, let me introduce Louise to tell you more about iCivics. And Louise, you're on mute.
All right, I think we're back on. So it is an absolute pleasure to be with you guys. Your mission of having a democracy that your children will be proud of, that's, we might in fact adopt that. That's fantastic. Love it, absolutely. So here we're gonna start a little bit. And Kitty, yes, indeed, the dress was awesome and really fun evening. So, but thank you for this introduction and thank you for taking the time. So I stand before you at a real crossroad in our nation. I don't think that's going to be any news to any of you. We are barely 4 months into what was a violent attack on the nation's capital. We stand between what is a country that will come together and get its act together and have a democracy that our kids are proud of, and one which frays. So we've seen these undermining of democratic norms for decades now in our field and in the political science field. And the question is, what happens from here? This kind of deep polarization, it has consequences. In fact, we've lost young people. Young Americans are only 30% of them believe that democracy is a very essential system of government. That's a huge difference with older folks who think over 72% of them, those who are born before the World War II, is very essential. The issue here, and what I'd like to focus your attention on, is it's a two-way street, right? When democratic norms fray, democracy doesn't work, kids start to not believe in it, and you either get them to engage less or more, right? So it's either a virtual circle in which we're able to convince young people that it can work for them and they need to be engaged in it and to know about it, or it's a vicious circle and the disengagement continues. So that is the place where we stand, and that is why we need an investment in civic education. That's what we're about. The situation as it currently stands is not at all surprising. In 1957, when Sputnik happened, when the Russians launched Sputnik, we recognized as a nation that we need to invest in STEM education. And we in fact did that, and it has worked. Our nation is very competitive in STEM right now, and that's partly as a result of those investments. So today we spend $50 per student per year, federal dollars, in our school systems for STEM education, which we think is great. Now, if you compare that with what is spent to support our democracy, civic education, we spend 5 cents per student per year. So that's the gap we're talking about here in terms of what needs to happen to align our national priorities with a system of government that is very difficult. This is the American experiment. It's unique and it's self-government, and it's actually very hard, and it requires, and that is the beauty of what Justice O'Connor saw, which is that it requires an investment in young people. So as a result, our students don't do very well at all on the most widely accepted notion of what proficiency is. So there's the nation's report card, otherwise called the NAEP. The civics portion of that, only 24% of our students are proficient, and that is not changed over decades because this investment in civic education has gone on for decades. The reality is that there is a solution. I'm not saying that civic education would solve every condition in every issue in our democracy. We have to restore many democratic norms, civility, as you pointed out. But civic education needs to be one of the solutions. And why am I saying that? Because it works. We have research that shows that it benefits students. Students that get a quality civic education are more likely to complete college. They're more likely to gain employable skills. They're more likely to vote, to engage, to be part of their community. In 2020, if you look at the data, there was a recent summary and analysis from Circle. The youth vote was up by a lot. So that's not surprising. Overall voting rates were up in every age category. What is interesting is that for the first time, the youth vote made a difference in some very critical races: Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona. So when you look beyond, when you look 10 to 20 to 25 years out, you want to ask yourself, shouldn't we prepare those students for those votes? Shouldn't we have very well prepared students for these critical races, for their role in this process? And so not only will civic education benefit students, but it also benefits our democracy overall. And the really unbelievable thing about civic education, it's a unicorn. We had some polling data from Frank Luntz, we commissioned this polling data as iCivics. And he found that of all the solutions to reduce polarization and bring us together as a country, the number one solution was civic education, and both Republicans and Democrats agreed. That's unheard of, right? Most of the solutions are either favored from one party or the other. And so that is why we think that's very fertile ground for an investment in civic education. So that's the background for this conversation. And now, why am I here? We, as Jay pointed out, started out as iCivics as an idea in Justice O'Connor's brain, and now we teach 8 million students a year, over half of the nation's students. 120,000 educators use our materials every year. So we're the sector leader, and we are, our mission is a thriving American democracy supported by informed and civilly engaged young people. That's what we aim to do. A few years ago, when we took a look at what we were doing, realized that we weren't going to be able to get there to fulfill our mission without having a movement that made civic education a priority for this nation. So not only are we a resource provider, but we have built a movement toward civic education. And so let me spend a couple minutes telling you about both sides of our work so you understand a little better what we do. We are known for our games. So they're simulations of civic processes. So there's things that you couldn't do if some of you were teachers, you couldn't do in your classroom, teach the presidential election. It's really hard to do. So that's where technology steps in. This year in 2020, whenever it's an election year, our most popular game is called Win the White House. So all of our materials, as Kitty said, are free. So let me explain a little bit about Win the White House. So in Win the White House, the student is the candidate. So they're running for president. They choose their party, they choose their issues, and then they start running a campaign. They decide what states to go into, where to poll, where to fundraise. And in the process, over many weeks of their campaign, they either win or lose, and they learn about the electoral college system. So it makes it fun. It's really challenging and very, very popular. We have 14 of those role-playing games. We also have many other lesson plans and so on. I do want you to know, though, that our materials were research validated. So by which I mean that independent third parties ran studies against iCivic materials, and they found that students who use iCivics have higher gains on civic knowledge, that is sort of how the system works. Civic skills, so those are skills like detecting misinformation or disinformation, and civic disposition. So civic dispositions are things like, are you able to work with somebody you disagree with? Can you actually see the other side? And can you find common ground to solve civic problems? So all of those things, we have research to validate that it works. As I said, that's sort of our bread and butter and what we do, but we also spend quite a bit of time to help civics become a priority for our nation. And we do that through a coalition. So coalition called Civics Now, CIVXNOW.org. That coalition has at the moment over 166 cross-partisan partners. These are organizations like the YMCA, the Girl Scouts of America, the ADA, the League of Women Voters. So a lot of large networks. It's sort of what you do when you don't have money. You try to get these networks together to apply pressure. Most of our work is on policy and advocacy. Right now, we have a bill in Congress called the Civics Secures Democracy Act. That's the fuel which the civic education movement needs to invest in civic education. So $1 billion a year for 5 years, bipartisan, right? This is a unicorn in our current Congress. Both Republicans, very senior, very conservative Republicans, and Democrats support the Civic Secures Democracy Act. I bring this up because May is our advocacy month. We are trying to reach every member of Congress with our message. We've created a toolkit, and you're going to get the link. We could sure use your help. One call to a representative or your senator would be very helpful to show support for this issue. That's what it needs. I'm just going to mention briefly that we're also the grantee from the National Endowment for the Humanities for a project called the Educating for American Democracy Initiative. Over 300 people came together, found common ground to issue guidance about how to teach history and civics, inquiry in depth for the future. So schools, districts, and states could model their standards based on this guidance that we've issued. Got tremendous amount of press, tremendous amount of attention, very much a common ground kind of perspective. People from all political views have come together for this, and it's been a real honor to be to be in the lead on that project. We've also worked at the state level. So we're monitoring 90 bills dialed in 34 states this spring. Lots of interest in civic education in this session. We have a task force that meets regularly with 32 states. We have a big policy summit funded by the Carnegie Corporation of New York in September, a virtual summit, September 21st and 22nd. We'd love to have you there. Everybody is welcome. And we have several, we just noted here, several of the local coalitions we work with that might be of interest to you if you live in those states. So we've talked about big numbers, half the students in the country, 120,000 teachers. We've talked about policy, but really, I want to just spend a moment on why this matters on a human level. Right? This is not about numbers. This is about real teachers and real students. And so I thought I'd focus a couple minutes on a couple of our really amazing users. I'm going to start with this teacher, Chowdhury, and I apologize to her if I'm mispronouncing her name. So she's actually really interesting. Before the pandemic hit, we went and visited her classroom in Oakland, California, and it was a real honor. So Ms. Chowdhury had a career in law and finance before she became a high school teacher, which is really amazing. She now is teaching seniors for the last 3 years. And she tells us that not only is she telling students that civics is the most important class, but also that students are realizing through her instruction how important this is to have a voice and to feel like you're part of this system. And this is her student, Brandon. He's 18 years old. And it was really an honor to meet him. He told us the story. It was just before the 2020 election. His family, most of them don't vote. They don't think it matters. They think it's a waste of time. And having gone through this class, he realized the importance of civic education and how much it gave him the voice. And he went out and voted for the first time, and he and his mother. And so it was such a heartwarming feeling for me and for the team to see that our work actually matters to real day people and kids. And so it was a real honor. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and thank you and welcome your questions. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if somebody's going to shoot questions. I see there are a lot of them, but I'm not sure that I can capture all of them.
Jay, do you want to moderate the questions, or?
So you go ahead, and we'll take whatever questions come.
Okay, that sounds great. Okay, there are a lot of them, and I'm going to try to group them together, but that might not be my strongest suit. So maybe what we'll do is start with the education component of iCivics, and then we'll work out to the broader conversation around the national coalition and also around the legislation that hopefully we can help make a difference and get it passed. So a couple of questions. First of all, the idea that this curriculum is obviously available to all teachers and students who want to go ahead and sign up on the website. Can you tell us a little bit about, because I'm a former middle school teacher, so this is a little bit of my sweet spot. Can you tell us a little bit about how iCivics engages educators in order to create curriculum that's not only developmentally appropriate for students, but also user friendly for educators. Give us a little bit of the how that works.
You know, what was really great about Sandra Day O'Connor is that she really listened. And when she founded iCivics, she went to educators first and foremost. Met the father of educational gaming, Jim G, and started out developing games as the first notion. Hired only educators. So our team, so Dr. Emma Humphreys, who's with us today, leads our team. All of the curriculum developers are educators. We have a set of folks who are on civics and history. We have some educators from the English language arts. We have a review committee that assesses the materials for their balanced political diversity points of view. So we've got a review committee. We've got academics involved in that review process as well. So the beauty of iCivics is really about its ability to understand educators and what they need and give them just that, right? We have all of our materials are designed for the 45-minute period, sometimes over many of those 45-minute periods, but they take into consideration the standards, what educators have to teach, and the available time that they have, because we know that's one of the biggest issues. They put it in fun and engaging language, which is why educators like it, because students like it. So that is really the biggest strength of the iCivics development process.
Louise, there are a couple of related questions to what you were just talking about. So a couple of people asked, how do teachers fit iCivics into their curriculum? Is it in addition to social studies or history? Also, are independent school teachers receptive to using your curriculum as well?
Yeah, so we actually, if you look at the adoption map for iCivics, we're in all 50 states, and we look exactly like a map of education in America. So our biggest states are also the biggest education states: California, Texas, Florida, New York. So it's everywhere. It's in public, charter, independent schools all over. Of course, the majority of our users are public school teachers, because that's the majority of education in the United States. So that's the first piece of it. It is mostly used in social studies class. So it is used all the way from 4th grade. So I actually joined iCivics because my son did it in 4th grade. So Daniel came home, and it was just around the election, the first Obama election. And he said to me, I got to go play a game. And I'm like, we don't play games, we do our homework. And he's like, no, this is the homework, Mommy. And so he went off and played the game, and he came back and told me all of school should be like iCivics. And I'm like, I spent 25 years in education technology before that. And I had to bribe them in the past. So I had an older son. But anyway, it was really, I started paying attention. I didn't join iCivics for several years after that. So, it was really an important moment for me that I saw that this is a place where both teachers and students can come together over what we do. So, but we also, it's all the way from 4th grade, all the way to AP classes. We have some community college that also use iCivics.
I have can I just do a follow-up question around the technology piece? How are you, when iCivics is sort of communicating with educators, or your education network is letting you know, how has the pandemic and the fact that this is a technology-based, education platform, how has that impacted your work? I mean, I'm sure you're seeing the same thing that we are all hearing about, these broadband issues for especially like rural Americans, and, kids living in, sort of lower income houses. Like, how are you guys having to sort of take that on in addition to everything else you're doing?
Yeah, it was a really difficult transition, but obviously we were already all digital. So it helped us compared to other programs that were in person. But there were still, as you point out, there are big gaps, right, in digital access in schools. And so what we found is in some cases, what happened is that school districts printed out our materials in print, took those packets and drove them around to every household. It was painful to see, frankly, but it did happen. And our games cache locally, so you don't have to rely on stable internet all the time. So that's also a help. We then pivoted really quickly and created a game odyssey so that parents can play with their kids. So there's an incentive in continuing to play and do more online. And that was amazing. The team really pulled together and did that within a month of the pandemic hitting. But overall, I would say that what we're seeing is that there's less instruction going on out there in the country, right? And that's impacting every discipline in every way. And we're seeing teachers, we just had an educator network meeting. We have 400 teachers who are sort of the core of iCivics, our biggest advocates, and that we bring them together on a regular basis. And they were sharing how tired they are and how difficult, and how many of them are thinking about leaving the profession. It's a very difficult time, as you know.
Louise, here's a question from Nicole Heath. How do you fund your program? I assume it's all private funding, but is it primarily individuals or foundations or corporate support? Do you work with any of the computer game companies?
I wish we worked with the computer game companies. We've tried many times. If anybody of you has connections there, I'd love to talk to them. No, we don't. We are mainly funded, so the core of our support is institutional foundations, large Carnegie Corporation, Hewlett Foundation, and many others. We do get some funding from the federal government through the National Endowment for the Humanities. This is the project I was talking about before. And then the rest of it is private donations from individuals, and we're deeply grateful for that. And it is entirely philanthropic, but not entirely. There's about 10 to 15%, which is earned revenue. We do license our materials out to publishers and others, but that's kind of limited so far. Our budget is roughly, we actually got a large donation from Leonard Lauder this year, which increased our budget substantially. So we will end up around $7.9 million this year. Traditionally about, we've grown from 3 to more recently $4 and $5 million a year.
Here's a question from Cynthia. How will you address the differences between a conservative view of teaching civics versus a more liberal and diverse path? I've seen a huge backlash locally against any approach that includes any mention of equality in terms of race in particular.
Yeah. This is an extraordinarily hard issue, and it is probably the hardest issue I've faced as an executive director in all the years I've been here. We are seeing a number of anti-critical, quote unquote, critical race theory bills roll across the states. And it is even threatening our federal bill as a result of controversy over a Department of Education issued priority rule. We have, on an ongoing basis and in a very substantial way, tried very hard to reach consensus with folks on both sides who are looking for common ground. That is what we were able to do in our Educating for American Democracy. We believe there is a path in which we acknowledge the deep failures around race in our history, and also the incredible achievements of this country and of individuals. The point of education, particularly civic education, is to provide students with hope, to provide them with the idea that they can be a useful civic agent, knowing everything there is to know about democracy, how they can participate, right? So no one wants to give students a view of history in which they feel there is no hope. At the same time, it is very hard to stand before a group of students of color and not acknowledge that that the history is painful and that we have to make it relevant. So we try to do both. We are calling for more, deeper learning and more history, stories of achievement among people of color. And so as well as all of the rest of our history, which is very highly complex and difficult. But that needs more, not less. And so, but having said that, I would ask you for your help. I think there are so many incredible Americans who are looking for common ground, who want to talk about race in productive ways. And I find the use of this issue by those who are looking to divide us to be deeply troubling. I'll leave it at that.
Here's a question. What do you see as the biggest hurdles to passing the federal legislation? Or it could be state legislation too.
Yeah, so there are two issues. One is it needs a lot of attention. There are so many issues that are on the Hill right now. It needs to be elevated to be a priority. So that's one. And then there is this issue of race, which some folks are trying to use as a divider among Americans. And we need to fight back. We need to say there is common ground. We did sit down together and we can do this. And I think a lot more people have to speak up about that.
Let's see, there was another, I just saw an interesting one. Oh, is there a program that engages parents and students that teaches civics to the civics, that teaches civics? Too many adults are uneducated about how democracy works and how the Constitution enables democracy.
Right. Deep agreement there. So there's been a lack of civic education for a very long time. Therefore, we've lost generations. We did do a trial to use our materials and teach adults about civic education. It worked in part very, very hard to find places that have ways to reach people who are not already converted. Right. So the folks, the adults that we need to reach are those that are harder to reach. And so very few organizations have those kinds of networks. I'd point to the National Constitution Center as being one of those great places that does a lot of adult programming that you might want to direct people to. But clearly there's a bigger need here. And I hope somebody does that. We're a little busy with young people.
All right, here's another one. Does iCivics address media literacy in any of your work?
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the biggest issues. We believe it to be one of the most important skills that we can teach in civic education. Right? The ability, we have a game called Newsfeed Defenders. We have a whole library of material that teaches about both the skills in trying to detect disinformation, the sources, learning journalistic practices, but also about the actual mechanics of how these Facebook algorithms, how the social media works, so that you can actually teach the kids how this stuff works, because they use it a lot. Doesn't mean they really understand how it works, right? So you need to do both. And we think this is one of the most critical issues that needs to be taught.
Here's a question about Civics Now, the coalition. When you started the coalition Civics Now, what did you find where places of cross-partisan ground? Where did you find places of common ground?
Yeah, I think I'll address that through Educating for American Democracy, which is just sort of more recent and easier a little bit to describe. I would say that the place that we found a lot of common ground is within civic knowledge, and that's why we started there, right? We know that the conservatives really care about the founding and about understanding how we as a country achieved so much, and the grounding and the philosophy and so on. And on the left, there is also an appreciation that civic knowledge and the way our system works is important, as well as wanting to go further into taking action. So if we could come around together around notions of civic knowledge, then we could go further around the pedagogy. We have been able to get common ground around a notion called reflective patriotism. So I know that there's been a certain amount of on the left a reluctance to use the word patriotism. Uh, but we think that this notion of reflective patriotism actually is a notion that can bring everyone together, because it acknowledges that we need to be able to criticize our country, to criticize its failures, but also love it, right? So those are the tensions, both tensions that bring together both parties. It was a very hard process. Now, I don't want to minimize it. The discussions were heated, and the engagement was very strong. We had some very right-wing people, and we had some very left folks. But through, if you have goodwill and you are trying to find common ground, you will. There are so many wonderful Americans who are trying to do that. And I really believe in that process. I think the process is being hijacked right now, and that's where that's what we should combat. But we were able to do it, and we were also able to do it about prioritizing civic education. Lots of folks on the right, and obviously the right is splintered into different groups, but there is a substantial portion of it that actually believes in that. A lot of also believe in experiential learning in the form of community service. So that's another area of common ground.
Here's one. You noted positive impact on completing college skills, voting, etc. How are you able to track impact over time and leverage that data to further promote civics education as practical education, the way STEM has been marketed?
Yeah, what a wonderful question. I think it's really important for our message. So in order to do that, what we want to have is a set of data, right? So this is a field that doesn't have a tremendous depth of data. So what we have provided, we have called for our civic learning plans. These are measures by schools of what they are investing to graduate civically prepared and engaged students, and how they will measure that performance over time. And then we would like to have that data aggregated at the state level and then also published at the national level. We'll see if we get there. But if only schools were to say, we are going to commit to this and we are going to track our progress. One of the ways in which we think is very promising on that notion is that many states, California being one, New York, others, are adopting these civic seals, right? So those are measures of excellence for civics within the K-12 system. We would like them to be tracked at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade, not only as for the seniors. And then use that notion about the proportion and the equity of those civic skills being awarded over time to ensure that we have an equitable and yet an excellent system of civic education. So that's the future. For right now, the Civics Secures Democracy Act calls for measuring the performance of students on the nation's report card, the NAEP test for civics, on a state-by-state basis. So at regular 2-year intervals, so we can follow whether students are doing better. So if we pass legislation in a state, then we can measure whether the students are doing better as a result of those investments. So that's our accountability measure. We believe accountability is very important. It is overall not a tested field. It has suffered as a result. But on the other hand, I think parents are really reluctant to do more testing of their students at this time. So it's kind of a little bit of a bind. That's why we're using the NAEP test, just to be clear, is not a student achievement test. It is a sampling test, meaning your student is not necessarily going to take it every year. This is, they sample from different schools and they rotate them over years. So it simply gives you an overall performance of whether students in a particular state are doing well or not.
Does iCivics teach students about the importance of state civics as well as federal civics?
Absolutely. In fact, what's interesting about that is that a lot of the state constitutions provide for the right to a civic education and equitable civic education. There's actually a lawsuit going on right now, which is actually getting some traction on this notion. So we look back at the state constitutions as well. Now, you know, the amount of time that's available for that kind of instruction at the K-12 level is pretty limited. So it's a bit of a light overview, but we have done it in some states.
Will these measures be available publicly? How can nonprofits help collect data from schools? We work specifically with educators and faith communities who are very involved in testing and exploring new approaches to civic learning in the classroom and school-wide, and have much to share, but I'm not sure the right way to share back our findings.
Yeah, so Lindsay, we know the work of Civic Spirit. Thank you so much. And I think the place to continue that conversation is within our Educating for American Democracy communities of practice. We are working on that, on structuring that data right now. As I said, this is a future-looking project, and we will continue to engage that entire community in the evolution of that data set and in evangelizing about its usefulness. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for your partnership.
Let's see. Do you make an effort with 12th graders to register them to vote? It would be an excellent metric, obviously.
Yeah, so that's part of our state policy menu, pre-registration. In some cases, it can happen at the state level. It's been an interesting process, as I don't know if many of you know, we do run a coalition in Massachusetts called the Massachusetts Civic Learning Coalition, in which passed legislation in Massachusetts a few years ago, and budget as part of that was high school registration. And I'll be honest, that the legislative part of this was pretty easy to pass, but the difficult part is actually implementation of it. In a local control state like Massachusetts, going around and ensuring the Secretary of State does its work to actually get high schools to have the programs in place to do pre-registration is a fair amount of work. So you got to pay attention to both. So if you guys want, if there are some of you want to join the efforts in the coalitions at the state level and help push that, that would be very useful. There's a considerable amount of heavy lifting to be done, even if you're able to pass a legislative mandate to get things to happen here. But it's obviously very important work.
Great. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I wanted to make just sort of a comment or two on my own experiences with civics. So like Louise, my kids, I have two boys, one is a junior in high school and one is an 8th grader. And their schools, as they've gone through middle school, had just coincidentally were users of iCivics and for their students. And my own experience is that, you know, my now junior would come home, you know, from middle school and it'd talk about he and his buddies are literally continuing the game they started at school and playing at home because they found it interesting and enjoyable. And I mean, how many classes do you hear about where the kids are coming home and want to do more because they found it engaging? And that was part of my mom's vision, which was to reach kids. You can make civics shouldn't be this boring, dry, stale subject. There are ways you can make it interesting and engaging. And early on, they figured out that, you know, the insight was, hey, let's make this role-based games. You're putting yourself in the process. You know, you're playing the role of a judge, or you're playing the role of somebody who's running for president or getting legislation passed. And you gain a real level of sophistication through that interactive learning, the way these games are designed. And then as we've extended as an organization to have materials for lots of high schoolers as well, we don't rely just on the games. We have other curriculum materials and traditional materials but all still with the insight that you can make civics fun and interesting. And that's the way to really capture their interest. My son, Dylan, as I said, who's now a junior, ended up doing a project, a research project over the course of last summer. And he did a national survey of young people, recent high school students, to get their feedback on civic education. And there was lots of good detail. Just a couple of highlights. One of his big findings in this national survey of young people was that most students are satisfied with their high school civics course, and they're largely similar to their satisfaction for US history courses. So there's room to improve satisfaction, but students generally like their civics class, but they identified a whole bunch of ways that can make it more engaging and more interesting. And they're exactly the kinds of things that sort of iCivics brings to bear. A really interesting finding was around that there was a belief that finding that high school civics courses should devote significantly more attention to teaching students how to get involved in the community and encouraging them to do so. So 75% of students said they feel it's important to get involved in the community, but only 31% students say that their K through 12 classes effectively prepared them to be an engaged participant. So what they're saying is, I want to be involved, just give me a little bit of more ideas about how I can become involved, and a little more inspiration. And I think that could be a really intriguing way to get young people more involved in their communities, which would be an amazing outcome. And then just the last little highlight was this survey was another source showing that taking a high school civics class is very positively correlated with numerous desired civics income. So he asked about their voting, students' voting intent, their stated importance of getting involved in the community. And there was a complete correlation between kids who taken civics classes. It increased voting intent, it increased their stated importance of getting involved in the community, and a higher agreement that civics classes effectively prepared them to get involved in the community. So again and again, we're seeing through research from scientists, as well as my high school kid who did actually a really sophisticated research project that validated the kinds of things, the importance of civics to young people, their agreement that civics can be taught in better ways, and that validation of the kinds of tools and approaches that iCivics is taking.
Wow, thank you, Jay and Louise. This was such a fruitful and timely conversation. I think on behalf of Big Tent, I just want to say that we really appreciate your time and your talent and your energy. And we are so grateful that Justice Sandra Day O'Connor saw the situation on the ground as it was. I definitely did not. And, you know, I was living in my own little raising two boys bubble, but excuse me, I think we all know now that we have really got to dig in and provide a civics education to every American student. And it's a really vital way for us to rebuild our democracy. So I just want to say we are so grateful. I hope that everyone will check out the iCivics website, the Educating for American Democracy website. The form that was where they presented the roadmap in March is an excellent conversation. And it does highlight what Louise was talking about, that there was this real coming together and crossing some very big divides. So it is an incredible opportunity to sort of hear how that work went on. So we will definitely put that in our recap tomorrow. And we will also be sending you the action items so that you can take action in your states to support the legislation, both at the state level and the federal level, which, as we know, we all really need to do to start to move the needle on this. And I just want to remind everyone about our upcoming events. Will Carter from Rural Democracy Initiative is our next Tent Talk next week. We're not missing a week. We're coming right back in next week on the 18th. Senator Klobuchar will be with us on the 26th. And journalist Andrea Bernstein will be with us on the 16th. So please check out our website. lots of events, our newsletters, our podcasts, I mean, not our podcast, but podcasts we like. And again, thank everyone for joining Big Tent. And if you want to support iCivics, the link is in the chat.